Imagine this. Tomorrow morning, scientists announce something unbelievable. They have discovered a treatment that stops human aging. Not forever, but allows people to live about 500 years. You take one treatment, and suddenly, your expected lifespan is no longer 80 years, but 5 centuries. At first, it sounds amazing. You could master several careers, travel the world many times, see entire centuries of history unfold. But then a question appears. Big one. Will the planet survive? If everyone lives for 500 years, would Earth become horribly overpopulated? Would cities collapse under billions of people? Or would something else happen? Surprisingly, when scientists study this idea, the answer is not what most people would expect. And to understand why, we first need to look at how long humans already live. For most of human history, life is actually short. If you go back a few hundred years, the average life expectancy is around 30 to 40 years. That sounds extremely short for today, but there is an important detail. People did not usually die of old age at 30. Instead, many died young because of disease, poor sanitation, childbirth complications, war, and infection. If someone survived childhood, they might live to 60 or even 70. Still, life was much shorter and much more dangerous than today. Then something incredible happened. Over the last 2 centuries, life expectancy doubled, thanks to things like modern medicine, vaccines, clean water, antibiotics, stuff like that, and better nutrition probably. Today, in many countries, people live 80 years or more. This improvement started during Industrial Revolution and continued throughout the modern era. But here is something interesting. Even though life expectancy doubled, human biology barely changed. We still reach puberty around 12 to 15, develops the same way, age in similar biological patterns. So the real question becomes, what would happen if medical technology pushed our lifespan not to 80 but to 500 years? Most people immediately imagine the same problem. If human live 6 times longer, then the population must be exploding. Well, the reality might not be that simple. Today, the average couple has around 2 children. If parents live only for 80 years, there are usually 3 to 4 generations alive at once. You might know your grandparents, maybe your great-grandparents. But if human lived 500 years, things would look very differently. You might have a great-great-great-great-grandpa still alive, dozens of living ancestors, huge extended families. Instead of 4 generations, there could be 10 or even 15 generations alive at the same time. At first glance, this sounds like a disaster. City might become overcrowded. Housing price might explode. Resources might become scarce. But something strange happens when we look at the real-world data. Because in reality, longer lifespans usually leads to fewer children. Over the last century, researchers discovered a pattern called demographic transition. This is how it works. When a society becomes richer and people live longer, birth rate drops dramatically. We can see this in many places today. For example, Japan is one of the longest life expectancies in the world, but also has very, very low birth rates. Same thing happens in South Korea, many European countries, and parts of North America. In some of these places, the average woman has far fewer than 2 children. That means population is actually shrinking. This is the opposite of what many people expect. So why does this happen? Why do longer lives lead to fewer children? There are several reasons. First, education takes longer. In modern societies, people spend many years studying and training before starting a career. Secondly, career becomes more important. When people expect long lives, they often invest more time building skills and wealth. Third, raising children becomes expensive. Education, housing, healthcare, all this cost rises in developed societies. As a result, many people choose to have fewer children, sometimes far fewer. However, there is an important issue we cannot ignore. Human biology would still exist. Even if people live for 500 years, human would probably still reach puberty around 15 years old. That means people would still become biologically capable of reproduction at very early. So here's the problem. In modern society, people usually wait about 10 to 20 years after puberty before having children. For example, we normally have puberty at 13, but our first child was around 30. But if human lived 500 years old, would people really wait for 150 years before having children? Probably not. That would be extremely difficult psychologically and biologically. However, something interesting has already happened in modern societies. Sex and reproduction has become 2 separate things. Because of contraceptions, people can have relationships and sexual lives without necessarily having children. This separation expanded during sexual revolutions in the 20th century. So in long lifespan societies, people might still have relationships early in life, but they might delay parenthood much longer. Instead of having a children at 30s, they might want to wait until 80 or 100 or even later. So, in the worst case scenario, they're going to have a society full of people, but not enough food, not enough resources, and extremely intense competition. But eventually, if we have an extremely intense population, then the birth rate will eventually drop and everyone will not have kids anymore. So at the end of the day, whether if a longer life expectancy leads to a later children or even less children or not, it is very unlikely that the human society collapses because we have too many children. I mean, we're not stupid, right? And there is another thing that is very important. So there is this magical technology that makes everyone suddenly being able to live 500 years old. It actually means that the oldest among our population has only been through 1/5 of their own life. Think about it. How crazy is that? It means that all of the people in a population, it's suddenly a part of the workforce. So they're going to go back to their job. They're going to be making values for the society instead of taking their pensions. There's going to be changes of rules about retirement and stuff. And so there's going to be an extremely huge explosion on productivity across the entire world. And maybe just by that alone can solve the overpopulation problem. And before humans are even suffering from overpopulation, maybe they're already gone to another planet and live happily ever after over there. Even in the worst case scenario where you don't have enough working people and you have way too much children everywhere, governments are struggling to feed all of them. There is going to be government regulation. If humans suddenly live 500 years, population growth would become one of of the most important political issue on earth. History already gave us an example. In the late 20th century, China introduced one-child policy to limit population growth. That policy lasts for decades. In a world where people live for 5 centuries, similar policy might become much more common. Governments would introduce systems like birth license, minimum parent age, limits on number of children. Those measures would allow society to keep population levels stable. There is another effect on long lifespans that people rarely think about, and it might be even more important. The biggest problem might not even about the population. Right now, human society changes quickly. A new generation appears every 20 to 30 years. Young people challenges old ideas. New technology spreads. Old leaders retire. This constant generational turnover drives progress. But imagine a world where people live for 500 years old. A powerful politician might stay active for centuries. A billionaire might control wealth for hundreds of years. A famous cultural figure might dominate their fields for generations. Instead of rapid change, society might become much slower. Ideas could remain dominant for centuries. Institution might become extremely stable but extremely rigid. Some scientists believe that this would slow down innovation because new generation often brings new way of thinking. Without that turnover, progress might slow down. Human civilization might become more stable but more conservative. So yeah, this is just some crazy idea I ran through my head and I make it into a video. Some crazy assumptions, right? If you like random stuff like this, make sure you leave a comment or something. I like to reply comments. And I am Mr. Sam. I'll see you on the next one.